to Victoria Rumble Room, an island show that likes to look at all the issues and peel the onion back. And we like to ensure that free speech is always expressed, and we love to hear issues. And, we take the popular and the unpopular on this program, and we try to discuss it in an open fashion. I'm Robin Adair, and with me, the always popular son of Sanic, the Croatian sensation John Jurisic, and Johnny Off the Top. We've had some very positive news now about Victoria's downtown business situation.
Exactly. Bouncing back. Come on. Like, that is so great. The Downtown Victoria Business Association has a new report out, which now shows that tourism dollars are strong. Local business is doing much better. However, according to Jeff Bray, there's still lots of pressures on downtown business, parking access being at the top of the list, Robin, although street people and crime remain a significant issue.
Well, certainly, the issue around theft and vandalism is still a dominant issue for many businesses. But one of the things that our businesses hear from their customers and clients is the drivability in downtown, and to some extent, issues around finding parking has really been a dominant theme the last couple of years. And we have to remember that this is a regional downtown. And so people from across the region have to be able to navigate in and around downtown easily. We love bike lanes. We certainly support more transit. But the reality is that if people can't drive in and around downtown, they'll stop coming. And our downtown needs to serve the region.
I'm not going to name a name, but I did talk to a mayor just last week who was saying, well, it's important we get these bike lanes because, more and more people are going to ride bikes regularly and we're not going to need our cars. And there's an assumption, I think, amongst some of our elected officials that we are moving away from cars in culture in general. Do you buy into that, or do you think there needs to be more of a recognition we're going to have both in the future?
Well, certainly, if we were Estevan or some of these small neighborhood hubs, I think that's a very accurate statement. But for your regional commercial business district that serves an entire region of 400,000 people, cars are still going to be the dominant way that people come in and out of downtown. And so we have to accommodate everybody. And we're going to have more people in this region in 10 years, not less. So we're going to have more cars, more delivery trucks, more Ubers than we do now. And so if we continually reduce the vehicular capacity, people will just choose to go elsewhere. And we do not have enough people who live in the core to support all the retail businesses, all the commercial spaces, all of the dentists, all of the lawyers and accountants' offices. So we have to make sure everybody can navigate safely and easily in and around downtown.
Jeff Bray does such a great job for the business community. It's important that we have the voices of people like Jeff Bray out there speaking for our hardworking business people. And, Jeff provides this very important service. And, it's not a popularity contest. It's just what is important to do in a society is express these things and let people know how business is going. Rather than just seeing doors get shuttered, it's good to know what's actually happening. And being popular, I should mention, is something that is very, very tenuous. You can be popular in your job. You can be popular on a show like the Rumble Room. Popularity is tenuous, and it takes more than just doling out goodies to win over public opinion.
Confusing times, emotional times, things changing all the time. No kidding, Robin, on the polling. No question. However, Justin Trudeau, talking about going national, is trying his best to be popular a year ahead of the next federal election. He's piled on taxes to the rich, promised tax breaks to the middle class, and is determined to clean up the country and the planet. Yay! However, Canadians apparently are getting a little tired of our Prime Minister, as the latest Angus Reid survey clearly shows. According to this Angus Reid survey, Conservative Party of Canada is up 97 seats since the last election. Expected potential to win 216 seats. The Bloc Separatist Quebecois could be the next official opposition at 49 seats, up 17. The Liberals' current government, they're being planned to be losing 119 seats, maybe down to 41. Justin Trudeau's Liberals are going to be demolished NDP is growing slightly, but still languishing in fourth place with a prediction of 35 seats. And Elizabeth May's Greens remain a tiny afterthought with 2 seats.
And on the provincial scene, we don't have the latest poll, but we certainly have a lot of indication that the BC Conservatives are nipping away at the heels of the leading NDP, David Eby and company. And certainly the BC Conservatives, maybe surprisingly still to a lot of people, are pulling away from Kevin Falcon and BC United. And that party have certainly lost traction. And people are mystified a bit, the change in name, and maybe the messaging hasn't been what people were watching for. They're hearing the messaging from the BC Conservatives. It sounds surprisingly similar in many ways to what Pierre Poilievre is saying, and they're jumping on that bandwagon, and it seems to be carrying them to second place right now. And John Rustad and company are doing a very good job, in my opinion, of reading the room. A case in point, a new social services center just announced in Victoria.
Marianne Alto and her Victoria Council have fast-tracked rezoning for most of the city to allow for social service facilities for the homeless. On top of that, the city has decided to leap into services provided by senior levels of government. 1.8 million is going to an access center for the street community. 300,000 civic dollars directed to solid outreach, buy property on Dowler, which borders on North Park, Hillside, and Burnside.
So what we have is Marianne Alto saying this is not a safe consumption site. This isn't a place you go to get your drugs and take your drugs. It's there to help addicts and the mentally ill and provide a limited number of beds. But a lot of the addicts we know will show up for those services and still may very well go outside and take their drugs or languish around that area. And it's very close to a school. And that's got a lot of the neighbors in a bit of an uproar, more than an uproar. And again, the Conservatives are reading the room on this. And Victoria Beacon Hill candidate Tim Thielman, who we've had on the Rumble Room, he was there out in front of City Hall with an angry crowd, and he delivered this verdict.
Our friends aren't safe. And how about our kids? So overdose deaths in BC under the BC NDP have doubled tragically in the last 7 years. Doubled. And what is David Eby doing? He's sneaking drug consumption sites into our communities and calling them social services centers. There's going to be 300 people per day smoking fentanyl next door from a school. That's fish in a barrel to the city's drug dealers, pimps, and thieves. That's the truth. It's fish in a barrel for them. Our kids aren't safe. They're not listening to you. They're not listening to the law. That's where we are today. We don't want to be here today, but we are. The good news is we don't have to be. Not for long. There's an election coming in October.
Where's Grace Lore on this issue? She's the local MLA. For that matter, where's BC United and BC Greens? Nobody says we shouldn't have services for people struggling on the streets. We've looked for that for years. But the public really wants more. What the public really wants are rehabilitation services, not places that further enable addictions, Robin.
It's a bit of a cart before the horse. I think the David Eby government were very proactive in terms of we're going to decriminalize drugs and we're going to have safe supply, and these are great ideas, and maybe it's going to lower the number of people dying, the tragic number of people dying because of opioids and dangerous street drugs. The numbers seem to rise. We don't seem to have solved this problem, and we still don't have rehabilitation in place. Where are the rehabilitation centers? That's what people really want to see now. And I think that people are taking a hard second look at this whole idea of safe supply, and for good reason. And, radicals have pushed their agenda, and it's not good for the so-called progressive movement that this thing is not landing well.
Yeah, not only not landing, missing the point altogether. We see this all over the world. We saw it in France when activists tried to damage a priceless Vincent van Gogh painting with tomato juice. And the latest stunt happened at Stonehenge in England, of all places. These clowns were protesting the oil and gas sector and want to turn off the pipelines. So they blast one of the world's great monuments to time, Stonehenge, with paint. Disgusting. I can't believe what I saw. What can they possibly hope to achieve other than just angering and pissing off just about everybody? Radical behavior from the left or the right is 100% counterproductive and crazy making.
And you know, John, it's not just the radicals who are trying to turn off our oil and gas. The federal government is determined, it seems, to get us on that track. And recently, a new study, which was paid for by Ottawa dollars, has come out. The Canadian Climate Institute has a new report. And in it, it states the provinces must stop natural gas expansion and invest in electrification to keep home heating reliable and cost effective. To hit a target of net zero emissions by 2050, there needs to be a dramatic increase in electric-based building heat and declining use of gas, starting right away. And gas expansion continues, in part because it's often treated as the default option for new buildings.
And now here to address this study is someone we've had in the Rumble Room before, and he gets a ton of attention and eyeballs on the internet. Dan McTeague was a federal Liberal MP for 18 years. Worth noting, federal Liberal MP. Today he's the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Let's zoom him in. Joining us is Dan McTeague, a man who lives and breathes energy policy. Welcome back to the Rumble Room.
Thanks for being here. It's nice to have a chance to let my hair down and let it go as I see it. Hopefully, engaging as well with all your many viewers.
I love letting my hair down. That's the best part of the interview. Hey, we've just looked at this new report by the Canadian Climate Institute. In no uncertain terms, it's saying abandon oil and gas and go electric, baby. We've been spending billions on a new oil pipeline to Port Moody here in BC, hundreds of millions more for the pipeline and facility in Kitimat on the West Coast. Is it really our best strategy to turn off the tap?
Well, you turn off the taps, you might as well turn off your economy as a whole. It's 10% of your GDP or greater, not to mention the direct impact, which is, you have fuel rather than bringing it in from some unsavory countries. I don't know, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, take your pick. If Canada's not producing it, having the third largest provable reserves in the world, then someone else is going to pick up on it. Worse, if you don't have your fifth largest natural gas supplies made readily available to the Indias and the Chinas of this world, then you are going to continue to see them use coal as a means of driving their economy so they can provide us nice cheap trinkets that we can buy at Canadian Tire and Walmart. At the end of all of this, though, I think we have to recognize who are the ones out there making these claims. It's not politicians elected, certainly not campaigning on a platform of saying disrupt, destroy, undermine your economy. If you don't believe it's the hemming in of oil and gases and having an effect, look at the value of the Canadian dollar. 137 pennies by US dollar means the price of everything is much higher and our purchase power is out the window. But let's look at the people who are proposing these things. And they do it so on a date like today, where we hear from a Canadian press story that, in fact, the intent to achieve this so-called net zero neutrality of carbon can only be achieved by shutting down the oil and gas sector. Good luck with that. But let's look at the organization itself. Canadian Climate Institute is a foundation, more from a charity, which originally received about 20 million from the federal Liberal government a few years ago. I know it's some of its folks. A little hard to find where their offices are, but Rick Smith and others have done extraordinarily well. They just got another $30 million. They raised zero money. And yet there they are, pontificating, suggesting how we ought to live our lives, and supporting an advocacy for the federal government to continue down this road of what I think is a road to economic perdition.
What I'm troubled by is that they put out these missives and it's reported almost verbatim in our general media without challenge and without question of what's the source of this information. And Dan, we have the federal government
significantly basing future fossil fuel strategy on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And that's to reach the Paris Accord. We've all heard these names before, but I mean, what do they mean? And Canada's promised to stop putting public funds into fossil fuel. And if that's really the intent, are we even close to actually doing that?
Well, it's the world of the insane and the absurd. There's nothing out there that we're doing that doesn't involve a dimension of fossil fuels. And if you're looking more specifically at what it's going to take for the renewables to take off, or to build 10, 15 Site C dams to meet these kind of artificial, arbitrary, and very questionable outcomes and goals. I don't think anybody out there thinks for a moment that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is in fact saying the doomsday scenarios, if we don't do these things, this is what's going to happen. If people are prepared to sacrifice and abandon everything in the belief that a trace gas like CO2 is going to cause cataclysmic world events with respects to climate, with respects to weather, then of course I'd suggest perhaps a refresher in grade 4 science, because that's not going to happen. Economically, I can't think of something that's more pernicious in trying to destroy that which is important for everything. You can't mine in this country to get your metals, your rare earth minerals. You can't build your EVs. You can't build renewables like solar panels, whether they're made here or in China. And you can't get your windmills to work, of course, taking millions of dollars, not to mention iron bars, concrete. All these things have to be done with fossil fuels. So it's a bit of a spurious and very ridiculous suggestion, because unless someone's got a new technology, there's no way you can do it without fossil fuels. Anybody who thinks otherwise is kidding everyone.
Listen, this Canadian Climate Institute report says the future lies with electric heat pumps for affordability and a greener planet. So are electric heat pumps more efficient than gas and safer and cleaner than gas?
Well, that depends, of course, if you don't mind spending a few days in the absolute cold. I don't know where you guys hang out in the certain parts of the winter, but in my neck of the woods, in many parts of central Ontario, you can't have a heat pump as a sole source of heating. In fact, you won't get insurance if you do that, because there's only so much warmth you can draw from cold winds when it's minus 20. The other problem with heat pumps is that they consume more electricity. If your grid and your transmission systems have not been in place, if you have not the means of production, if you do not have the ability to scale up the availability of hydro to everyone, including those using heat pumps, then it becomes a bit of a questionable pursuit. Because at the end of the day, heat pumps don't do what natural gas can do. That's not to say I'm a big fan of oil or natural gas. Frankly, I mean, they're entitled to do what they want to do. I think the better policy, the more sane policy, is to approach this from a perspective of what's the best thing we can do now. Remember, I come from a riding back in Pickering, where the first nuclear reactors for North America took place. I still keep this thing back in 1965. So not all wisdom is new wisdom. And what we have to look at is the possibility that Canada's diversity of energy options is a far better way of pursuing it. And don't take our word for it. Talk to the 10, 15 countries and their leaders who've come to Canada asking us for oil, asking us for LNG, asking us for natural gas, asking us for our technology. And so I kind of think Canada's got it right. The only problem is that we've got the Debbie Downers running the show in Ottawa with their technocrats driving the country into the ground.
You know, the feds in the province are making a lot of noise and also putting out a lot of messaging that natural gas is a bad thing, and that we need to move away from natural gas in our homes. We need to move to electric. We need to move away from gas stoves and gas heating and, gas fireplaces, all the things that people seem to enjoy on the West Coast. There was a big promotion to bring it here about 25, 30 years ago, and a lot of people embraced it. Now suddenly it's become a bad thing, and the municipalities have jumped on board in a big way. They've been talking about stopping all future construction that has gas fireplaces, that has gas implements, and they're getting very enthusiastic about this. So, does BC and Canada in fact have enough electrical power that we could just throw gas out the window and say, no more gas heating, no more fireplaces, we're moving electric tomorrow? Could we actually do that?
No, and it's ridiculous to think otherwise. You take a 5-fold increase in the current transmission grids and availability of supply across the country to do that. Second of all, you need a couple $1 trillion. Now, just so we put that in perspective, the Canadian economy is about 2.1 trillion bucks. You need to have another Canadian economy just to build this electrification fantasy out. And the reality is that as you make more demands on electricity, you suddenly believe that you can walk away from fossil fuels. Well, those things don't get built without, as I mentioned earlier, some of the most dirty kind of productions and disruptions. Yes, mining. So if you're going to mine for all these products, whether it's your copper for your lines or whether it happens to be, geraniums for electric vehicles, or whether it happens to be the metals, the smelting, you can't smelt without using electricity. I mean, it's been tried. It's extraordinarily expensive. I'm no more than 40 kilometers away from Dofasco and Stelco or ArcelorMittal. They don't want to use anything less than natural gas. Natural gas is clean. And I know that there are people out there who are paid by the federal government who are doctors for clean energy. All these grifting organizations receive money so they can come up with trendy little studies, many of them not peer reviewed, many of them where there's never been a cost benefit analysis. And thankfully, I think the next government's going to take those people, cut them off at the knees and say, if you want to push those kind of studies out, you do it without having your nose directly connected to the public trough, because we're sick and tired of the fanaticism, not based on science, but based on whimsical thinking that you can somehow get rid of these things. I'm upset for one reason, because we're now seeing a Canadian economy in real decline. People can't afford to make ends meet. Energy prices have gone through the roof. I've been saying for 6 or 7 years now, if you continue down this road of allowing a few fanatics, a handful of freaks who've never actually worked a real job in their life other than to complain about the environment, then what you're going to wind up with is an economy which is going to be very difficult to turn around. And we find ourselves increasingly at that point where we may not be able as a country to pull back. I saw this stuff in the 1990s as a member of parliament when we went deep into debt. We're probably in a worse situation now than we were then. And anybody who has any misgivings about this had better sharpen up, because if you're going to listen to a couple of, Pied Pipers who have their own environmental agenda, making sure they get tons of grift, call themselves charities, so there's no scrutiny as to the kind of charitable work that they do. There's a number of ways to skin this cat. I hate to use that expression, but I think these people need to be exposed for the frauds that they are and the deception that they're providing. And I think that's the best way to describe it. This is policy deception that you and I are forced to pay for. And we don't just pay for it directly. We pay for it for generations to come with their wonderful ideas. Think of the EV plants here in my province of Ontario, not built billions of dollars out the window, money that has to be borrowed in a world that's saying, no, we're not going that direction just yet. Thank you.
I'm going to continue to stoke the natural gas fires here. When the NDP came to power 8 years ago, John Horgan said he was going to stop oil and gas exports and go green. But that didn't happen. And now we are seeing our West Coast LNG plants near completion and our pipelines nearly ready to develop fuel. Finally, what would it cost the provinces to actually turn away from these projects now?
Well, I mean, apart from the sunk costs that these companies have completed, and apart from the fight that they've had to engage in despite receiving approvals, there would be a massive legal bill. I just wonder how many Site C dams your province can afford, because we knew the first one was only about 4 or 5 billion. What is it now? 15, 18, 20 billion bucks. And by the way, let me be really clear to people in British Columbia. You haven't felt the full effect of those costs being passed on to you in terms of your hydro rates. Governments are holding back. They're pretending this is not going to be a big deal because it's all political. But what if you wind up with 35 cents a kilowatt hour for power? That will deliver the death knell to most residential consumers in your province, on top of all the other things that are going on. We have gone down this path of magical thinking that we can simply wish these things away and that suddenly, boom, wave a magic wand and you have 3 or 4 power sources. I don't think the province of BC can afford the current Site C dam without consumers knowing the full cost and paying that full cost, much less have to quadruple that number, as many are expecting, if we're going to reach that Pyrrhic goal, that ridiculous goal, that nonsensical goal that doesn't prove anything of net zero by 2050. I think it's time for people to get real. And when I look at the number of people who are losing their employment, people who are leaving the province, people who are leaving Vancouver, people here in my province of Ontario who are saying maybe it's time we go back to the country where we came from because it's too expensive to live here. If that's what we want, yeah, then we can be the International Boy Scouts and walk around saying, "Oh, look at a great thing we did in terms of destroying our golden goose." But when you start, throwing people under the bus, you tend to lose them. And so, any good that's being achieved by going after all of these things in terms of the environment is completely lost when you forget about the person out there who can't afford to make ends meet.
You are a politician. I'm going to pull you into that realm. Let's take a look forward politically. Okay. All polls are indicating that we're going to likely have a swing to the Conservatives federally. It's even happening in BC. It's quite a surprise. Who knows where that'll end up? Are we entrenched with energy policy so much that can't be undone? Has that energy policy ship already sailed? And is the Canadian economic situation done?
Well, no, I don't think it's done, but I think a change in government will certainly, see a reversal of fortunes in the energy sector and the manufacturing sector. And I think the three things that I expect the next government to do: punt the carbon tax, punt the clean fuel standard, which is the second carbon tax, and punt something called the output-based pricing system, which is the third carbon tax that's applied on business. Get rid of those, get a couple of pipelines built, say Canada's reopened for business, especially given that we produce cleaner energy. You'll have a Canadian dollar come back to where it is. Canadians will be saving 40, 50 cents a liter at the pumps and return some of that lost purchase power, which will take a lot of pressure off the banks, the interest rates, and the concern about inflation. All this can and will happen, but it can't happen until the narcissist in principle, Justin Trudeau, packs up it with his friend, Jagmeet Singh, the carpetbagger, and leaves.
Always great to hear from Dan McTeague. Love hearing his thoughts on the energy situation. Lots of people have opinions about our energy, and we're happy to have other opinions on the show. That's the whole point of the Rumble Room. And on that happy note, John, time to wrap up this week's show. And perhaps you could encourage our beloved viewers on how they can continue to follow and support the Rumble Room and be part of the Rumble Room tribe.
The Rumble Room tribe, I love it. Well, it happens to be over 2 million viewers, cumulative viewers of the Rumble Room tribe. They watch us on Twitter. They watch us on Facebook. They watch us on YouTube. They listen to us on an audio podcast. They watch us on Instagram and TikTok. Really, wherever you live on the internet, you can listen to this dialogue between you and I and all the fascinating speakers. And that's a bunch of information.
I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.